All right, so picture this. A leader, well into his 90s, been in power for, let's just say, a very long time. Decades, actually. And not everyone's thrilled about it. In fact, there's quite a bit of public opposition, people yearning for change, for a new direction. You'd think the international community, especially those big Western democracies that champion human rights and self-determination, would be, listening to the people, right? But in Cameroon, it seems like a different set of rules apply for President Paul Biya. It's a strange and frankly troubling situation when you see how quickly some of these same Western powers condemn and sanction military leaders in the Sahel who oust governments, yet turn a more understanding eye towards a president who, let's be honest, has overstayed his welcome by several decades in the eyes of many of his citizens. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's really going on here? Why the selective outrage? Why the deafening silence when it comes to the democratic aspirations of Cameroonians? We see these Western nations talking a big game about democracy, about supporting the will of the people, but then their actions in places like Cameroon seem to tell a completely different story. It's like they have two different playbooks, one for countries that align perfectly with their immediate interests, and another for everyone else. And it's this discrepancy, this apparent double standard, that leaves a lot of us scratching our heads and asking some pretty uncomfortable questions about what truly drives foreign policy. So today, we're diving deep into this. We're going to try and unpack why, despite widespread discontent and a president who's been in office since some of your parents were in diapers, Western governments continue to back President Paul Biya. It's a complex web of interests, fears, and let's be frank, some pretty stark geopolitical realities. We're not here to offer easy answers because there aren't any, but we are here to explore the uncomfortable truths and try to understand the forces at play. This isn't just about Cameroon. It's about how the world really works and who gets to decide what democracy means in practice. So, when we talk about why the West seems to be looking the other way, or even actively supporting a leader like President Biya, the first thing we've got to understand is this. Foreign policy, especially for big global powers, is rarely just about warm, fuzzy feelings and promoting democracy for democracy's sake. It's often a cold, hard calculation of strategic interests. Think about it. Cameroon isn't just some random spot on the map. It's located in a pretty critical part of Central Africa, bordering several countries, and it has access to the Atlantic. This geographical position alone makes it valuable. For nations like France, the former colonial power, there are deep historical ties and ongoing economic and military links that they're not keen to sever, no matter who's in charge. And it's not just about historical baggage or geography. We're talking about access to resources, oil, timber, minerals. Countries want reliable partners who will ensure the smooth flow of these resources, and sometimes a long-standing, predictable, albeit autocratic leader is seen as a safer bet than the uncertainty of democratic change. Then there's the military aspect. Western nations, particularly the United States and France, have used Cameroon as a base for regional security operations, a staging ground for various missions. Having a government that's cooperative, that allows your troops and equipment on their soil, is a huge strategic advantage. So, when the people of Cameroon are calling for change, these Western powers are weighing that against their own military and economic priorities. It's a tough pill to swallow, but the will of the people can often take a back seat when these powerful nations feel their core interests are at stake. They might talk about shared values, but their actions suggest that stability, even if it's the stability of an undemocratic regime, is often prioritized over the messy, unpredictable process of democratic transition. It's like they're saying, "We hear you, Cameroonians, and your desire for change is noted. But right now, your current leader is, well, convenient for us." And that convenience, unfortunately, can be a very powerful motivator in international relations, often overshadowing the legitimate grievances of a nation's populace. Now, another huge piece of this puzzle is the global fight against terrorism. And in this fight, Cameroon, under President Biya, has positioned itself, or perhaps has been positioned by others, as a key ally. Think about the region, Central Africa, West Africa. These are areas that have seen significant extremist activity, groups like Boko Haram wreaking havoc. And Cameroon has been on the front lines of some of these conflicts, particularly in its far north region. Western powers, especially the United States and France, are heavily invested in counterterrorism efforts across the continent, and they need partners on the ground. So when a country like Cameroon says, hey, we're fighting these guys too, we're on your side, it's music to the ears of Western security strategists. They see Biya's government, despite its democratic deficits, as a bulwark against the spread of extremism. They provide military aid, training, intelligence sharing, all in the name of combating a common enemy. And when you're deep in that kind of partnership, you become very reluctant to rock the boat. Criticizing the government too harshly or actively supporting opposition movements that might destabilize the country could be seen as undermining a crucial ally in a very sensitive fight. It's a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, even if that friend has some serious issues at home. This creates a really tricky dynamic. The Cameroonian government can leverage this ally status to deflect criticism of its human rights record or its democratic failings. It's like having a get-out-of-jail-free card, but for international scrutiny. Sure, we might not be perfect, they can argue, but we're holding the line against terrorists. Do you really want to weaken us and risk these groups gaining more ground? And for Western powers, who are often laser-focused on immediate security threats, that argument can be quite persuasive. The long-term health of Cameroon's democracy, the aspirations of its people for better governance, can get overshadowed by the immediate, tangible benefits of a counter-terrorism partnership, however flawed. All right, let's talk about fear. Because fear plays a massive role in international politics, and it's definitely a factor in why the West is so hesitant to push for change in Cameroon. President Biya has been in power for over 4 decades. That's a lifetime for many people. When a leader has been entrenched for that long, the structures of power, the military, the administration, even the economy, become deeply intertwined with that individual and their regime. So, for Western policymakers looking at Cameroon, the idea of Biya suddenly leaving office, whether through popular uprising, ill health, or any other means, can be genuinely terrifying. They look at the situation and think, what comes next? And often their imagination paints a pretty bleak picture. They worry about a power vacuum, about different factions within the ruling elite, or within the military, or even ethnic groups vying for control. They envision instability, political chaos, and in the worst-case scenario, civil conflict. And let's be honest, Africa has seen its share of post-autocrat instability, so these fears aren't entirely unfounded from their perspective. They see Biya, for all his faults, as a known quantity, someone who has, in their eyes, maintained a degree of stability, even if it's an oppressive stability. This fear of the unknown often leads to a very conservative approach. Western powers might prefer the devil they know, even if that devil is deeply unpopular and runs a questionable government, over the potential chaos of an uncertain transition. They tell themselves that pushing too hard for change could unleash forces they can't control, leading to a situation far worse than the status quo. So, they opt for caution, for incremental pressure, if any at all, rather than supporting a more radical break with the past. It's a risk-averse strategy, but it's one that effectively props up the existing regime and leaves those yearning for genuine democratic change feeling abandoned and frustrated by this perceived preference for a predictable strongman. Now, we can't talk about international relations and why powerful countries do what they do without talking about money. Because, let's be real, economic interests are a huge driver of foreign policy. And Cameroon, like many resource-rich African nations, has significant foreign investments, particularly from Western companies. We're talking about oil and gas exploration, large-scale agriculture, timber, mining sectors where big multinational corporations have sunk a lot of capital and expect to see a return on their investment. These companies, and by extension their home governments, value predictability and stability above almost anything else. Think about it from a corporation's perspective. If you've invested billions in infrastructure, in setting up operations, the last thing you want is political upheaval that could disrupt your business, nationalize your assets, or change the terms of your contracts. A long-serving leader like President Biya, who has maintained a certain economic framework and a welcoming environment for foreign capital, at least for those who play by his rules, offers that predictability. Political continuity, even if it means the continuation of an autocratic system, can be seen as good for business. So there's a powerful lobby, both within these countries and internationally, to maintain the status quo. This doesn't mean Western governments are explicitly saying, we support this president because our companies are making money. It's usually more subtle than that. But the economic ties create a certain inertia. Diplomatic efforts might be tempered, criticism softened, because rocking the boat too much could have negative consequences for those valuable economic relationships. The health of their corporations, the jobs back home tied to these investments, these are all factors that weigh on policymakers' minds. And so, the desire for a stable investment climate can, unfortunately, align with supporting a regime that ensures that stability, even at the cost of democratic progress or human rights for the local population. It's a classic conflict between profit and principle. This is where things get really interesting and frankly a bit infuriating for many observers. Let's look at the Sahel region, just a bit to the north and west of Cameroon. In countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, we've seen military takeovers in recent years. And what's been the reaction from many Western powers? Immediate condemnation, sanctions, calls for a swift return to constitutional order, labeling the new military leaders as illegitimate. They're often portrayed as threats to democracy, disruptive forces that need to be reined in. And, there are valid concerns there, absolutely. But then, you pivot to Cameroon. You have a president, Paul Biya, who's 91 years old, has been in power since 1982. That's before many of the people watching this were even born. There are widespread reports of rigged elections, suppression of dissent, and a general feeling among many Cameroonians that their voices are not heard. His health is a constant subject of speculation, raising questions about who is actually running the country. Yet the international condemnation, the sanctions, the strong demands for democratic renewal, they're noticeably muted, if not entirely absent. Instead, you see diplomatic engagements, security partnerships, and a general reluctance to criticize too harshly. It's this glaring double standard that fuels so much cynicism. How can one leader who seizes power through unconstitutional means be an international pariah, while another who maintains power through questionable elections and decades of entrenchment, often against the popular will and visibly incapacitated by age, be treated as a legitimate, even necessary partner? It sends a message, doesn't it? That democracy and legitimacy are flexible terms, applied differently depending on who you are, where you are, and how well you serve certain external interests. This inconsistency undermines the West's credibility when they talk about promoting democratic values globally, and leaves many wondering if it's truly about principles or just about power and convenience. So, as we've seen, the reasons behind the West's continued support for President Biya, despite his long tenure and the clear desire for change among many Cameroonians, are complex and, let's be honest, pretty disheartening. It's a cocktail of strategic military positioning, counter-terrorism partnerships with a flawed ally, a deep-seated fear of instability after his departure, and of course, significant economic investments that thrive on predictability, even if it's the predictability of an autocrat. It paints a rather bleak picture, doesn't it? One where the pragmatic, often self-serving interests of powerful nations seem to consistently outweigh the democratic aspirations and fundamental rights of the people on the ground. This isn't unique to Cameroon, of course. It's a pattern we see repeated in various forms across the globe. The rhetoric of democracy and human rights often rings hollow when confronted by the harder realities of geopolitics and economic imperatives. It feels like there's a hierarchy of concerns, and unfortunately, the genuine will of ordinary citizens often finds itself at the bottom of that list. The sad reality is that stability, even if it's the stability of oppression, is often prioritized over the potentially messy path of true democratic change, especially when that change might not align with Western interests. And so, we're left with a very somber, very pressing question. When will the voices of the Cameroonian people truly matter on the international stage? When will their calls for accountable governance, for a chance to choose their own future, for a leadership that reflects their aspirations, be prioritized over geopolitical chess moves and economic bottom lines? It's a question that many Cameroonians are asking every single day. And frankly, it's a question we all should be pondering as we look at the world around us and ask what kind of global order we are truly building. Because right now, for many in Cameroon, it feels like their future is being decided by everyone but themselves.